Hello, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us tonight. We appreciate it. We're going to give it just a couple more minutes, make sure we get everybody able to join who wants to participate in today's meeting. But thanks again for joining, and I will walk through our presentation here in a little bit. And I apologize, we don't have any hold music for you.
We should cue that up for next time.
We say it every time. And
some elevator music. Yeah. Royalty free.
We did it once.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I just forget after that. Okay, let's see. So we got a couple people joining, so we'll go ahead and start at 6:05. Give it another 2 minutes. And just to let everybody know, we'll go over this a couple times, but the very beginning of this meeting will be in English and Spanish, and then we will break out into separate rooms. So there will be a full presentation in English and a full presentation in Spanish. So you're welcome to join either. They're all the same, but we'll let you know that a couple times and exactly how to do that when it comes up in the presentation. Thanks to everyone who just joined us. We're going to get started in just a minute. All right, we'll get started here in just a second. For everyone who just joined us, I mentioned earlier, there will be an English portion of this presentation and a Spanish presentation as well. They are both the same presentation. You just have the option, whichever you prefer, to participate in the language that you prefer. And we have Brenda Soto here with us tonight, who will be doing the Spanish presentation and also some translation for us. Brenda, if you'd just like to let everybody know that there will be a Spanish presentation available.
Esta presentación está dividida en dos idiomas. Está disponible en inglés, al igual que el español, y yo estaré interpretando la parte de español.
Thank you. And with that, I think, Nicole, we can go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick. Hey, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us tonight.
Hola a todos y gracias por tomarse el tiempo de acompañarnos esta noche.
I think we've already said this, but the introduction portion and the first few presentation slides of this meeting are translated into Spanish, and then we will open the Spanish breakout room for those who would like to join in Spanish.
La porción de introducción y las primeras diapositivas de la presentación de esta reunión se traducirán al español y luego abriremos la sala de reuniones en español para aquellos que deseen unirse en ese lenguaje.
I'm Nicole Obey. I'm the project manager on city staff for the Housing Element Update.
Soy Nicole Obey, la directora del proyecto del personal de la ciudad para la actualización del elemento de vivienda.
We're also joined by a few other of our city staff members, including Steve Holtz, Deputy Director of Community Development, Jane James, our Planning Manager, and Charles Kovac, our Housing Manager.
También nos acompañan algunos otros miembros del personal de la ciudad, incluidos Steve Holt, director deputy del desarrollo de la comunidad, Jane James, gerente de planificación, y Charles Kovac, gerente de las viviendas.
And our consultant team, Kimberly Horn, has a few staff members here with us tonight as well, including Nick Chen, Kira Pasqua, Molly Mendoza, and Brenda Soto for translation.
Y nuestro equipo de consultores, Kimberly Horn, tiene algunos miembros del personal aquí esta noche, incluidos Nick Chen, Kira Pasqua, Molly Mendoza y Brenda Soto para la traducción.
Tonight, we're going to go over a few topics related to housing in the city. We'll also be able to share some info from the public input survey that closed at the end of May.
Esta noche repasaremos algunos temas relacionados con la vivienda de la ciudad. También podremos compartir información en la encuesta de opinión pública que se cerró a fines de mayo.
We'll go over a few different types of housing products and also get into what density is. We'll see what a few product types look like as well through a visual survey on the Mentimeter website.
Repasaremos algunos tipos diferentes de productos de vivienda y veremos qué es la densidad. Veremos cómo se ven algunos tipos de productos a través de una encuesta visual en el sitio web de Mentimeter.
We'll also talk about some of the future opportunities for public engagement over the course of the project. And at the end, we'll have some time for community conversation and questions.
También hablaremos sobre algunas de las oportunidades futuras de participación pública en el transcurso del proyecto y al final tendremos algo de tiempo para conversar y hacer preguntas con la comunidad.
And with that, I will turn it back over to Nick and Molly. Thank you.
Eso es todo. Regresamos con Nick y Molly.
Thanks, Nicole. All right, let's go to the next slide. So as Nicole mentioned, we're really excited and so glad that everyone can participate with us tonight. If you were here for the Housing Elements first workshop, I think you probably know how this goes. But we just want to go over some key guidelines for having a productive workshop. So as Nicole mentioned, again, there's time for Q&A at the end. So please use the chat or the raise hand function to participate then. Participate. It's super important. We want to hear your ideas, your thoughts, and your input. So please share those with us. Remember to be respectful of others and listen to understand what your neighbors and what your fellow participants and community members are sharing with us. And have fun. Enjoy the workshop, enjoy the evening. Please, we encourage you to participate and to come off mute or share your ideas in the chat with us. So yeah, don't forget to enjoy tonight's workshop. Let's go to the next slide.
Durante esta presentación tenemos un guía para un taller productivo. Estamos emocionados de que puedas unirte a nosotros hoy. Hay tiempo después de la presentación para preguntas verbales. Utilice la función levantar la mano y se le llamará por su nombre. Para comentarios o preguntas por escrito, utilice el botón de chat. Participe activamente, necesitamos su opinión. Sea respetuoso y respete las diferencias. Escuche para comprender. Comparte tus ideas y abre espacio para otras. Y lo más importante, diviértete. Esta presentación se grabará y estará disponible en el sitio web de la ciudad.
Okay, so quickly going over tonight's agenda, Nicole mentioned a little bit about what we'll be discussing this evening. But first, we just want to provide an update on the progress of the housing element. Next, we will provide an overview of the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, what we'll more commonly refer to as RHNA throughout the workshop. We'll then get into a discussion about housing density and housing types or product types. So this is just a discussion about what is density, what does that look like? And we'll do a fun interactive exercise along with that density discussion. Then after talking about density and providing some background and some additional information, we're going to walk everyone through the housing element site selection process and really just provide an overview of what that analysis looks like. Finally, we'll move into just an update on outreach and letting everyone know if you weren't able to participate up till now, what we've already done to gather community feedback and what's planned or what we'll be doing in the future. We'll then talk about just next steps for the project and what the community can expect. And then that's when we'll move into that Q&A community discussion portion of the workshop.
Durante la presentación seguiremos la próxima agenda, que es progreso del elemento de vivienda hasta la fecha, descripción general de la evaluación de necesidades de vivienda regional, RENA por sus siglas en inglés, densidad de viviendas y tipo de productos, ejercicio de densidad y de viviendas, selección de sitios para elementos de vivienda, proceso de actualización y divulgación, los próximos pasos y al final repasaremos preguntas y respuestas.
Great. So again, just some quick instructions for participating this evening. Towards the end, we'll have that Q&A portion. We'd love for you and we encourage you to participate. If you'd like to do so, go ahead and raise your hand when that time comes and you'll be called on by a staff member to come off mute and ask your question or share your comment. If you don't feel super comfortable coming off mute, that's totally fine. Go ahead and send either your comments or your questions in the chat box and staff will be monitoring that as well so that we can provide some responses to you.
So, gracias por su participación en el taller de hoy. Para hacer una pregunta, por favor, utilice la función de chat para enviar su pregunta al personal. Levante la mano, se le pedirá que active el sonido del micrófono y haga su pregunta. Proporcione su comentario al personal.
Okay, great. So before we get into the presentation, we want to open up our Spanish breakout room.
Antes de empezar con la presentación, abriremos los grupos de español.
So if you would like to participate and hear the presentation in Spanish, there should be a message that's popped up letting you know that you can join the breakout room. Go ahead and click join on that.
Si gustas participar y unirte a la presentación en español, te debe de estar llegando una notificación que dice que te unas a ese cuarto. Debes de hacer clic allí.
And if you don't see it, there's probably a button at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that button, it'll prompt you to join the Spanish breakout room as well.
Si no ves ese botón, tiene que haber un botón de la parte baja a la derecha en tu pantalla que debe darte esta opción.
And finally, if you're having trouble, you can't find the button for the breakout room, go ahead and send a message in the chat or come off mute, raise your hand, and we'll just send you into that breakout room so you can participate.
Finalmente, si estás teniendo dificultades en encontrar ese botón, solamente envía un mensaje en la caja de chat y una persona del personal te admitirá a ese cuarto.
Great. So I don't see any hand raised, but we'll just wait. If everyone can just be patient for just another minute or two. We want to make sure that we give everyone a chance to join who needs to participate in Spanish.
So, nuevamente, si gustan unirse a la presentación de español, también pueden levantar la mano si están teniendo dificultades en accesar ese cuarto.
Okay, well, we'll continue to monitor that. I think Molly, Brenda, and a few of our folks are going to jump into that Spanish room to go ahead and give that presentation. So if you'd like, as Molly mentioned, just go ahead and raise your hand or let us know if you'd like to be put into the Spanish breakout room. Otherwise, we are going to get started with our presentation for tonight.
Great, thanks, Nick.
Thank you. Give me just a second to get going. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it. As you mentioned earlier, we always appreciate and need your input in terms of the housing element update process. It is a very interesting process, we'll say that, but we do our best to try and walk everyone through so that we hopefully are able to answer the questions that you all may have. One of the things that we noticed, many of you may have participated in the community-wide survey that was held. It closed at the beginning of this month, and we're still going back through feedback. part of the reason we're still going through that feedback is that we got over 2,000 individual responses in both English and Spanish, which is just an incredible amount. And one portion of that survey actually did relate to potential locations of sites and just the sites analysis process in general. So the city felt it would be a good community outreach idea and process to go through just a little bit of what that sites analysis process is. Well, we can go through at a high level some of the feedback that we've gotten. We can also walk through a fun interactive exercise that looks at density. You may hear the term density, and we'll go through the definition of it in just a couple slides. But we want to make sure that we cover that process, and then again at the end when we go through the question and answer, have the opportunity to answer your questions. So just a couple quick logistics. If you can, please stay on mute until we get to the question and answer portion. Just helps to cut down on background noise. If you're having any trouble in terms of your connection, sometimes it does help to turn your camera off. That can help to make the sound come through a little bit better. And as well, you can go ahead and just again raise your hand when we get to that portion, and we'll be able to see that and call on you. So with that, we will jump into our presentation. So first thing we want to cover is just a little bit about what we've done to date. As you know, the housing element process has been going on for roughly 6 months now. It is roughly a year plus long process and does cover the next 8 years in terms of the city's planning practice for the housing element update and housing related items. Currently, we have completed the review of past performance. This is a look at the city's 5th cycle housing element, which is the current housing element that actually is good until October of this year, when the city will then transition over to their 6th cycle once adopted. A little bit of what this does, we look at what was successful in terms of programs. The city had a whole list of actions that they laid out back in probably 2012, 2013, of actions they wanted to take over the next 8 years relating to housing. So part of our charge is always to look at how well we've done in the past and what we need to do going forward. So we've taken a look at each of those programs, determined how successful they were and whether they should be carried on either to the 6th cycle, if they should be modified, or if the city completed them and they're no longer needed. The other item we've completed is a demographic community profile. This is a look at housing statistics as well as demographic and economic statistics that describe the community. It is based on largely on the census, the U.S. Census data, but does take into account a number of other sources as well. This helps us to get a baseline for the community. It helps to inform the programs that we identify later. For instance, if there is a large proportion of the population that is senior, we may look at programs that are aimed at aiding seniors in either finding housing or housing solutions relating to senior housing. A few things we're still working on. One item is called the housing constraints and resources. So this looks at potential constraints to either development of housing or for people finding housing, for residents being able to find housing. And then resources are either land resources or other items that the city can bring forward to try and mitigate some of those constraints. Sometimes they are able to be mitigated, sometimes they're not. Oftentimes they're broken down into 2 different types of constraints, one being non-governmental, one being governmental. Non-governmental are items like land cost, high cost of building materials. Some folks may know on this call, building materials and labor is a huge expense right now. And then other items are governmental controls. These could be either the zoning, development process, fees, some things that the city has control over. We largely want to focus on governmental because those are actions the city can take potentially to try and alleviate some of those if it does turn out the analysis says that some of those may be constraints. We're also looking at the adequate sites analysis. That's what we're going to focus our conversation on tonight. So I'll get into that in a little bit. And then the housing plan as well. That's what I mentioned earlier in terms of the actions the city will commit to take over the next 8 years relating to housing. So for the folks who, I see a lot of familiar faces, either on your photos or on your video, and see familiar names. For the folks who have joined us for the previous workshop, you may know what RHNA is, but we always like to make sure we catch everybody up. So RHNA does stand for the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. This is the number of units the city was allocated through a process that began at the state level, went down to the regional level, and then ultimately to the local level to identify a number of housing units the city needs to be able to plan for. We always like to let everybody know The city is not required to build these units. The city is not a developer and does not have the ability to build these units. The requirement on the city really is to create the zoning framework that allows these units to be able to be built by the market should it be determined that these units should be developed. The housing plan also looks at a number of actions to help to get some of these units developed, if it's seen fit, at these different income levels. So on your screen, you'll see 4 different income levels. They are defined by the state. It's very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. And I won't take you through all the numbers, but a couple of the big ones to notice. This is basically the annual income ranges. And the numbers you see on your screen here are based on a hypothetical family of 4 with a median income for Orange County in 2021 that's determined to be 106,700. So these are all just a percentage breakdown of that number. There are actually individual income qualifying requirements based on number of individuals in a household that's broken down into 1, 2, 3, etc. That are on the State Department of Housing and Urban Development's website. The big number that I think you would like to look at is this 13,368. This is the total number of units the city is required to plan for, and it's broken down into, again, the income categories that I mentioned. So we want to do a couple of things. One thing we want to do tonight is a fun exercise around density, and you'll see that in a little bit, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page, the term density refers to dwelling units per acre. And that's basically how we measure the number of housing units that are on a site. So there's a couple of ways to think about this. If you think about a 1-acre site and there's 1 housing unit on there, say a single family house and a large yard, that's 1 dwelling unit per acre. If you take a look at the example that's on your screen right here, it considers a site that's 12 acres. This would be the gross acreage. Oftentimes sites cannot accommodate the full gross acreage, and they do what's called a net acreage, which subtracts out roads or steep slopes, environmental constraints, a number of different items, and you get to 8 acres. So number of units in this example on this site is 240, and when you divide 240 units by 8 acres, you get 30 dwelling units per acre. 30 dwelling units per acre happens to be what we call the default density. That's what the state defines as the density at which affordable housing may be built. It is not, it's more for planning purposes. It does not mean that automatically when housing is built at either 30 dwelling units per acre or above, that it does in fact mean it will be affordable. There are certain affordable requirements that need to be put into place to deed restrict affordable units. So that's just a quick breakdown again of the dwelling units per acre calculation that we use for density. A couple of different housing development types you may hear us talk about. The first is what you may be more familiar with in terms of like a traditional house. We often call it single family or single family detached. You can also have what's called single family attached, which are often referred to as duplexes or townhouses. You may see these items on your screen up here. On the bottom right, you'll see apartments. Again, many apartments take many different shapes and sizes depending on the densities. Sometimes they're 2 stories or 3-story walk-ups. Sometimes they're a little bit larger, like you see here over next to Bellaterra and Golden West. And then the last term you'll hear us use a lot is accessory dwelling units. And this is actually often referred to as ADUs. It's an additional unit that can be built on either a single family or multifamily lot. And it helps to provide additional housing and kind of spread those units out throughout the community. So city's housing strategy will ultimately take into consideration all of these different types as we start to plan for that number. So here's where we want to have a little fun. We like to do a fun game that we'll introduce in just a second, but if you could all go ahead and go take out either your phone or another screen on your computer, we'll give you a minute or two just to get set up. If you just go to menti.com, there is nothing to download, nothing that you need to do other than to go to this website and type in this code. We have about 5 questions that we want to ask, and really they are related to different developments and density as well. So I'll leave this up for just a second, and then in just a minute, I'll pass it over to Kira, who's going to walk us through the exercise.
Hey, Nick, we do have one phone-in caller. So for anyone on the phone listening in, you can go to your computer or use your smartphone, right? I think.
Yep.
Or iPad, and you can go to www.menti.com. And when you're there, you're going to insert the code 74386130. And anyone calling in, please let us know if you want us to repeat it, either the website or the code. The website again is www.menti.com. And the code is 74386130.
Okay,
I'm
Kira.
gonna take over
Absolutely.
screen. Thank you. I can see you guys are already participating and clicking the icons, which I appreciate. So as Nick said, we have 5 housing developments that we want you to guess the density per acre. I'm going to give you guys another minute or so to click an icon. And then we'll start with our first example.
We'll also be giving just a little bit of information on each of these developments to kind of help shape the some of the assumptions you may make. And again, I'll give it afterwards. It's not to spoil anything.
Give you guys another 30 seconds, and I'm going to switch over to our first question.
For anyone that just joined, Dave from Kinley Horn put in the chat the website we're using, www.menti.com, and the code to enter to participate in the exercise. So you can join it at any time if we've already started, FYI.
Okay, Kira, why don't we go ahead and get started?
Okay, perfect. All right, 1 second. There we go. So this is our first housing development. I'll give you a couple seconds to look at the picture, and then I will switch over to the question.
So as you're looking, just take a look at kind of what you see on the screen. Ultimately, the only question we're going to ask you is what do you think the density of this development is? And again, that's how many housing units per acre do you think it is? And just to let you know, completely fun game. Pick whichever you like. We did this earlier in our office with a bunch of planners, and it was surprising how different the answers were. So.
Okay, I'm going to switch over to the question now. So what density do you think that the previous photo is? A, 46 density units per acre, B, 56, C, 66, and D, 76 density units per acre. So I'll give you guys a couple 30 seconds to answer, and then I'll reveal the answer. Okay, 10 more seconds.
Okay, pretty evenly split.
Yeah. Okay, answer is 56 density units per acre.
Look at that. So before we jump off this screen, Kira, are you able to go back actually, just real quickly? So just a little bit of information. This is 56 dwelling units per acre. It is, as you can see, it's between 3 and 4 stories, different elements of it. It's the actual complex has units that are between 600 and 1,250 square feet. And this, just if anyone's interested, this parked at just about 2 spaces per dwelling unit. And I saw a comment in the chat. Unfortunately, I do not know exactly how many buildings they had, but it's largely the same building. 603 total units. So All right, Kira, you can go to the next one.
Okay, perfect. This is the next housing development. I'm going to give you guys again a couple seconds to look at the picture before I switch over to the question.
Yeah, I saw something in the chat that was asking where these are. We can provide that information afterwards. I think the last one was actually the only one we have that was outside of California. It was in Superior, Colorado.
I'm going to give you guys another 5 seconds, and then I'm going to switch over. Okay, oops, wrong one. Right, so you guys are already answering. Okay, so what density do you think this picture development is? A 36, B 46, C 56, and D 66 density units per acre. Give you guys another 20 seconds. For those who just joined, we're doing a quick polling exercise. If you could go to www.menti.com and use the code 74386130. We're just on our second question, and we have 3 more questions to go, and we'd love for you to participate.
I saw someone asked where the question was. Sometimes there are some little kinks with Mentimeter. You may just need to refresh your screen that you have open, and it should take you right to where we're at.
I'll give you guys another 10 seconds, and then I'm going to reveal the answer. Okay, so the answer is 46 density units per acre. And then I'll go back to the previous slides so Nick can explain.
Yeah, so the group got it right again.
Yeah.
What's interesting is, at least what trips some folks up is often, this doesn't actually look very dense. It's between, as you can see in some elements, it's 2 stories, some it's 3 stories. But what's interesting about this is actually an affordable housing project in Los Angeles. It's an affordable senior housing, senior apartments, and it is 46 dwelling units an acre. What helps to make it, again, a little bit not as tall and a little bit, we'll call it more dense in terms of the density of what you typically see for a 3-story, is the unit plan sizes range from 540 units to 700 square feet. Sorry, so 540 square feet to 700 square feet. There's actually 100 units, and the entire development is 3 stories. So just a little bit of information on the project.
Okay.
You can go to the next one.
I'm going to move to the next question. Perfect. Okay, this is
I
our.
wonder if the group can go 5 for 5. We'll see.
This is the 3rd housing development picture. So I'll give you guys like another 10 seconds, and then I'll switch over to the question.
That's a great point from Pamela as well. I don't actually know the parking statistics on the last one, but because it's senior, often there is a lower parking requirement as well, which helps with that density.
Okay, I'm going to switch over to the question. What density do you think this picture development is? A11, B21, C31, and D41 dwelling units per acre. Give you guys another 20 seconds, and then I'll reveal the answer. Okay, I'll give you guys another 10 seconds. Okay, the correct answer is C31 dwelling units per acre.
So this is actually another, if we scroll back to it,
Yeah.
55 plus affordable. This is actually over in Irvine in the Great Park. 31 dwelling units an acre. The unit plan sizes range from 530 to 735. And again, this is 3 stories. And to the earlier comment, this is actually one parking space per unit. So as you can see, again, we're at 3 stories, but we're at probably 15 dwelling units per acre, less than the previous example that we showed for a very similar type product. So here we can go to our last 2.
Yes. So this is the 4th housing development that we want you to guess. I will give you 20 seconds. I'm going to switch over to the question. Do you guys think this picture development is 24, 34, 44, or 54 dwelling units per acre? Give you guys another 20 seconds. Okay, another 5 seconds. And the answer is A, 20 dwelling units per acre.
We had to throw a trick one in there. So a little bit about this one. This is actually in Playa Vista, so just a little bit north here. This is actually for sale stacked flats. So this is a for sale product, and the unit plan sizes range from 1,600 to almost 2,200 square feet. And the reason we wanted to include this is just to show that oftentimes, design has a huge part to play in how a building looks, but also the characteristics of the building, whether it's for sale or for rent, and the types of units, whether they're more townhouse type or apartment type, has a huge part to play in what the development ultimately ends up looking like. As you can see, this is the lowest density project we've shown, but it's tied for the tallest in terms of the overall height of it.
I'm going to move on to the last question, Nick.
Sounds good.
This is our last question. I'll give you guys 20 seconds to look at the picture. Okay, another 5 seconds. So the last question is, do you think this density, the pictured development is 30, 40, 50, or 60 dwelling units per acre? Give you guys another 10 seconds. Okay, and the answer is D, 60 dwelling units per acre.
All right, we ended on a high note. So this, some people may recognize if you're familiar with the city of Orange. This is Uptown, Amley Uptown in Orange. Maybe what you might consider a more typical rental apartment project. The unit plan sizes range from 570 square feet all the way up to 1,385. There's about 330 units on a 5.5 acre site. It's 4 stories all the way across. This building actually wraps around a parking structure. You'll often see residential developments that are apartment products that will do that. And again, just under 2 spaces per dwelling unit. So appreciate that. Appreciate you all taking the time to participate and join on our fun little game. We like to do that. And as I switch back to the presentation here I'm going to take sharing responsibilities back. The reason we go through that and the reason we like to do that type of exercise is just often when we start to talk about sites as we go through this process, we talk a lot about these terms, and there's not always a one size fits all. It's not to say when you're in the 30 to 40 dwelling units per range, you're always 3 stories. As you can see, a lot of it depends on development standards that are applied. A lot of it depends on the overall design, the type of housing that it is. There's just so many factors and so many characteristics that go into the development that ultimately get decided after the housing element process is actually completed. So the housing element will help to guide all of this going forward in the future, but much of the city's existing development process in terms of review and the standards that are applied are really what help to shape a development. So as we go through and we start talking about these different densities, they're important to know and to understand, but also it's important to know and understand that they could result in a number of different types of housing products, much like they currently do in the community today. So we want to talk a little bit about the site selection analysis overview. Without going too far into too much detail, we want to let you know what the city will be doing in terms of the analysis part of this process. So the city looks at all parcels within the city boundary and analyzes them for their future growth potential. This is either the existing or potential future capacity based on, say, potential land use or zoning changes that may be made. The city looks ideally at vacant sites as those they don't currently have an existing use and maybe most likely to redevelop. Again, underutilized parcels, very similar. If a parcel is underutilized or it has a building on it, but that building is not occupied, it shows that there may be a potential to redevelop that site. A couple other areas we look at: underused parking lots, existing commercial properties with mixed use potential, or existing non-residential uses like light industrial or business parks. We also look at proximity to transit corridors, proximity to the services, goods and services that may be needed. We consider, especially when looking at areas that could accommodate the lower income levels, the ability to have access to transit services and goods that are needed is an important factor as well. So as I mentioned earlier, we actually did a community survey, and I hope that many of you participated. We're still working through that data. Over 2,000 responses is an absolutely fantastic feedback amount to be able to get. It resulted in a lot of information. So a little bit about what you see on the screen here is we had a map that actually talked about different housing developments. And this map, as we scroll in, we have a bunch of different data points. The further you scroll out, it starts to kind of bring them together. But the reason we pull it up is just to show people identified, I should say people made comments, residents made comments, participants made comments for sites and areas all over the city. There was not really a concentration in some areas. You can see some of the numbers in some areas are higher, but it's also important to know that these represent not just comments to say housing should go in this area. We're looking through all these comments. A lot of them say that housing shouldn't go in here, or they give comments and recommendations on the types of housing that should go in certain areas, or they make recommendations for even things that are non-housing related, like the need for parks in certain areas, or the fact that there may be high traffic incidents. All good information for the city to know as we go through this process. And we're currently working through, essentially all of this feedback and cataloging it. It will be available in the city's public review draft document. There'll be a summary and as much background data as we can kind of compile and include in Appendix C of that document. So later, when you get to have your chance to do the public review of the document, you'll be able to see not just this feedback in terms of the community survey, but all the community outreach the city has done and all the rest of the survey responses as well. We again can't do individual responses. The document would be 5,000 pages long, but we can do summaries of that data as best we can. So a little bit about existing housing types within Huntington Beach. This is similar to what we talked about a little bit earlier, but we have single family detached, there's duplexes and condominiums, townhouses, apartments, senior living, what we call mixed use, which it could take a couple different forms. As you see on the bottom right screen, you may get a shot of a Bellaterra there that has apartments above commercial uses. This is what we call traditional vertical mixed use. There's also on that site what we call traditional horizontal mixed use, which is residential uses next to a commercial use as well. And then lastly, I discussed accessory dwelling units as well. These have become really popular over, I'd say, the last decade, but even more so over the last couple of years. The state has actually put a lot of legislation in place that promotes the development of accessory dwelling units, and these often, given the size and the fact that they can be developed in the backyard and then leased out, or have extra space for a family member to stay, or a friend, whoever you may want to have occupy that unit. It is one potential solution for affordable housing. And the city will be considering all of these housing product types as part of the analysis that we go through. So part of what we need to do is identify the existing capacity in terms of the total number of units that can be built based on the existing zoning. So we've actually just gone through and done this. We're working through that data right now. This is essentially if we change nothing in the city right now in terms of the zoning, how many units could the city accomplish? I can tell you right now, it is not enough to meet the 13,000 plus unit need that the city has in terms of their regional housing needs assessment allocation. And then I mentioned a little bit earlier, the concept of default density. For a city the size of Huntington Beach's size, that's set at 30 dwelling units per acre. So what that means is for planning purposes, the state has determined that development at 30 dwelling units per acre or above may be affordable, or at least in part affordable, partially due to the size of the units and some of the other factors applied to it in terms of financing for projects this size and how that tends to work. Again, it does not mean that development that comes in at 30, 40, even 50, even higher is going to be affordable, but there may be a portion of it that is affordable. So the other concept, if you can't meet your existing regional housing needs allocation on your existing zoning, then the cities and jurisdictions need to consider what's called rezoning. And simply rezoning is taking the current zone and either changing the zoning to a different zone which allows more units in that area, or it could be applying what's called an overlay, which essentially allows an additional use on top of the existing use. So an easy way to think about this is if you have, say, an existing commercial use, and it's an existing grocery store, we'll say. If you apply an overlay on top, it gives the property owner the ability to develop a residential use if that overlay identifies residential uses. It does not require the property owner to do that. It does not make their existing use non-conforming or in any way invalidate the existing use. And the property owner could essentially take what's there right now and continue to have that use stay in place for however long they see fit. All it does is give them an additional entitlement that allows them to build residential as well. So the city will likely be looking at both strategies as a way to meet their RHNA need. Another topic that we take into consideration and we do analysis for when we're talking about the sites analysis process is what's called affirmatively furthering fair housing. And this, simply put, is a fair and equitable distribution of housing at all income levels throughout the community. What this is not is to say you divide the community up into even square miles and you put the exact same number of housing units in every box that you see there. That is just not simply how communities are developed and not how the process is supposed to work. What it is intended to do is take a look at the city's current distribution, make sure there's not an over concentration of any one type of unit, specifically low and very low income units or units that are affordable to those folks in those income categories, concentrated in any one portion of the community. So what it does is protects against communities being overburdened in any one spot. It takes into consideration a variety of housing types, a mix of affordability levels, as I mentioned earlier, access to transportation and employment, and then available community resources, especially for those folks who need either the use of public transit or aid in terms of some of the other services that are available. So just a couple more slides to go. I appreciate everybody's patience to walk through this. Hopefully the exercise helped to break up the PowerPoint a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about what the city's done so far in the outreach process. So hopefully many of you participated in the community workshop back in April. If you did not, that's actually available on the city's website. You can watch a recording both in English and in Spanish of that presentation. It goes into a lot more detail in terms of what the regional housing needs assessment process is, how that was actually determined at a high level, and what the city's responsibilities are, as well as some demographic data and just some background information that we shared at the time. There's also an online survey that was made available. As I mentioned, over 2,000 responses in English and in Spanish. And the city will then go to some planning commission, city councils, either study sessions or meetings. We'll have a second workshop, which this is actually, this is kind of an intermediate town hall. There will be a second formal workshop as well once the public review draft is released. The city is also holding meetings with different stakeholder groups. Some of these may be nonprofits, local members of the local development community, both for affordable, for market rate housing, local community groups. The city has met with the local school districts, faith-based organizations, a number of different groups. The city has been doing an extremely robust outreach process in terms of the groups they've met with. And we'll continue that throughout this process. Ultimately, we'll go to, again, some more planning commission, city council meetings, all of which are public meetings all of which you're encouraged to attend and give your comments, give your feedback. The document then needs to go to, after the document's reviewed, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Document will go out to public review for 30 days, where members of the community or anybody who would like to can give comments, provide their feedback to the city. The city will provide a number of different methods to be able to give that feedback, and also in English and Spanish as well, to make sure anybody can give it in the language that they would like. And then ultimately that document will need to go up to the State Department of Housing and Community Development to be evaluated and reviewed. The city will need to consider the HCD's feedback ultimately before adopting their housing element locally, with the overall goal of getting a letter for certification from the state. So a little on next steps. There are still a number of different ways to participate. As I mentioned, the City Council and Planning Commission meetings are public meetings, and we do encourage you to come and give your feedback. And ultimately, when the public review draft, which we anticipate coming out in the next few months, is made available, we would really love for you to give your comments. We will be developing a short survey as an easy way to give responses, but everyone is welcome to provide responses either as attachments through emails. We'll cover all of that in the second workshop, so don't worry about that at all. If you'd like to stay engaged in the meantime, all of this information is available on the city's housing element update. This presentation will actually be available on the city's housing element update website, as well as our timeline. We continue to keep that as updated as we possibly can, recognizing that timelines change for processes like this, and that's always subject to change. All past community outreach resources that can be made available are on the city's website. So feel free to peruse those at any time. You can also sign up for, I believe I'm getting a little ahead of myself, sign up for updates. I think Nicole and I were talking, there's 80 plus or so folks who have signed up to receive regular updates. We promise we won't send too many. We won't overburden your email inbox or anything like that, but we will make sure you get the important information when it's available, to find out about meetings like this and other information, like when the public workshops are available, or when the public documents are available as well. So you can easily subscribe just by entering your email address on the city's website. So with that, we thank you. We're going to go and do a question and answer after this, but just wanted to let everybody know before we do that, you can reach out to the Housing Element Update team at any time by emailing housingelement@surfcity-hb.org. And then you can go again at any time to the website and be able to submit responses as well. But this goes directly to the city's Housing Element Update team, and we'll make sure we get a response back to you to any questions you may have. So with that, myself from Kimley Horn, Dave Barquist, Kara Pasqua, as well as several members of city staff are available to answer any questions. This was, again, a very informational PowerPoint. We've put a lot of information out there. So we're happy to take any questions that you may have relating to the housing element update process. So if you can go ahead, we got somebody already in the queue.
Yeah, please raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you go ahead and raise your hand, we'll make sure to keep note of that, and we'll try and keep track of the order. But we will get to everybody, so don't worry about that. So with that, I see Mr. Armory Hanson. Go ahead.
Yes. I noticed on the excuse me. I noticed on the slide, there was a slide in relation to, I don't remember what it was called, but the rezoning, that's what it was, the rezoning. I would like to express my personal opinion that the rezoning commercial with additional residential is preferred, for me at least, compared to rezoning one type of residential as a different type of residential. I think it has a less negative impact on the community. It ensures that people are not forced out of their homes. And so I think the commercial with additional residential is the preferred of those two. I'm also, quite frankly, disappointed that this meeting was not held in person, although Mr. Chen did mention there might be a community workshop free. Maybe that'll be in person, I don't know. And I will say that one positive is that the city council meetings, and I would think they haven't met yet, but the planning commission meetings where this would be considered would also be in person. So I will say there's some positive in regard to that.
Great, thank you. And that actually is a great point. So we'll continue to make information available on the website for all the future meetings. If they are available in person, we'll make sure to let the community know when and where those will be, or if they'll be held online. Thank you. Next, I see Shami. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Hi. Well, I'm familiar. I'm, in favor of affordable housing, but I'm really familiar with all the complaints I hear. And the pictures you show all had setbacks from the street and landscaping. And I think one of the reasons why people really dislike projects like Elan is that they don't have any setbacks. There's no landscaping. They're very tall. And so in terms of the community aesthetic, people have a real problem with them. And and my second question was, most recently I saw a goofy proposal for a building at Yorktown and Beach that was like 181 units plus 50, which included 58 parking spaces. And I was wondering, are you guys going to enforce something even close to the building code, or is something like that going to be considered? Or what's the deal? That's it.
So, yeah, for that project, I'm not sure there's been an official submittal yet. Jane, if you're on, I think you know a little bit more details than I do specifically on that project.
Good evening, everyone. This is Jane James. Yes, that project has a unique submittal. It's not a formal submittal like we're used to seeing, where a full set of plans are proposed. They have done something where they've submitted an intent to propose a project, and under some state law provisions that requires the cities to reach out to different Native American tribes and let them or engage in a consultation if desired by the tribes to discuss the project. So it's an unusual proposal in that it's not something that we've been used to seeing here in the city, although they are proposing that intent to submit, engaging with the Native American tribes as a first step. So it is likely, we think, that that project will be submitted formally at some time in the near future.
Thank you. And Shami, I can, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying, that just sounds pretty outrageous. Would we conceivably be forced to, approve something like that?
The project would have to be analyzed for compliance with both city zoning and general plan requirements, as well as state law that's in effect regarding affordable housing projects. So as staff, we haven't made any kind of analysis yet because it hasn't been a formal submittal yet. So they will be required to comply with laws that are in effect when they do, or if they do, a formal submittal.
Okay. And then what about the setbacks and landscaping? Because I know that would really improve the look of some of the projects that people really don't like.
We've also heard that comment many times, Shami, about the setbacks and landscaping. And I think your city council and your decision makers have also heard that comment.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So others, I don't know, actually, I appreciate for those who are submitting comments in the chat as well. We'll try and monitor those and either respond verbally or respond in the chat. I do see one comment about when will the draft be available. We'll continue to update the website. Currently, we anticipate about a month or two before a public review draft is available. We need to complete the analysis. Obviously, we just received some of the feedback that we got in terms of the community survey. And again, there was a large number of responses there. The document will then need to be obviously reviewed internally by the city before it's made public. But all of that will be noticed, and those documents will be made available for 30 days to give plenty of time to be able to be reviewed and then have us be able to consider that feedback. At which point the document will then go to the State Department, as I mentioned. in which you can also still consider that essentially a public review time as well, and that the document will still be available. You can still make comments and the city will still consider those along with HCD comments. The document is a draft up until it's adopted, and until that it is still just that, a draft. Patricia, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, and I put it, thank you.
I just saw that.
Put my question comment in the draft. I love that first map, and I'm assuming the stars with the numbers are the number of respondents. Is that true from that area? Or are those areas where people said put some affordable housing?
So those are the number of responses where someone put a comment. So it's not necessarily correct. It's not necessarily the people who live there. It's where somebody placed one of the little symbols that we had that was on the graphic. And there were a couple different symbols that we dig into. One was, areas of interest. One was potential housing areas. And then everybody left a written comment with their note as well. So we knew why they were placing the symbol there. So as you can imagine, that was why there was a lot of data, and essentially on this presentation, we could really only go through high level what it was, but yeah, the team is going through that.
But it looks like good citywide participation, just as a comment.
Oh yeah.
The other question is, and it's left the building.
No worries.
At least in general, maybe you could comment on types of housing that people have recommended.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any kind of positive comments about what people are looking for as far as development?
Yeah, I would say there.
I have two.
No worries. I'll take that one, and you can go with your next one as well. I would say there were positive comments related to. Again, just based on the number of responses that we got, probably every type of housing as well. And to be transparent, there were negative comments relating to certain types of housing as well. And we'll consider all comments together. But I think a lot of residents did seem to pick up on the fact that because the number is so high in terms of the number of units we need to plan for, that development is likely to be, say, apartments or some of those that are at higher densities. It's very difficult to meet the city's regional housing and needs allocation on single family homes. You can imagine how many single family lots you'd have to do just to get close to that. So, there were a lot of comments that were supportive of higher densities, in certain areas, recognizing that it didn't make sense everywhere in the community, but there were areas that seemed to make more sense than others. That's really the feedback, again, that we're part of it that we're going to take a look at as we go through the analysis, and combine that with a number of other factors that I went through today.
So one question I have is about swapping, or it could get complicated, but swapping undevelopable land for housing for maybe commercial purposes, and then taking the commercially zoned property to develop for housing. And as an example, the corner of Warner and Nichols is owned by Republic, and it also has some historical significance. It's, I think, about 4 acres. And I think that is scheduled for development of a storage unit property, which that seems to be taking over too. But maybe that acreage could be swapped for property that cannot be developed for residential, like the corner of Garfield and Gothard, the northeast corner there. I don't know if it can be, if it's salvageable for housing or not. But is there any analysis by the city on those types of properties, that maybe even properties that are, I know you do commercial and the overlays, or industrial and the overlays, but can they be rezoned for residential then? And that type of transaction, how would somebody go about doing that?
Yeah, so I think I heard 2 questions in there. The first is that, the city can rezone properties or more likely apply an overlay to a property to, again, add an additional entitlement to that, to where you could take a property that currently you can only develop residential and add the ability to develop residential as well. Again, it's up to the property owner to ultimately what they do. To the kind of the second question that you had in terms of a property swap, that's not really something that the housing element looks at, just because that's more of an agreement between property owners. And again, those are private property owners. So the city can look at what, in a planning sense makes sense for those different areas, but can't look at, a transaction that would take housing from one spot and put it on another. They can only plan for sort of the ability to be able to allow a private property owner to do that if it made good planning sense and it met a lot of the requirements we talked about earlier in terms of accessibility to transit resources, those items.
So could the city, aside from the housing element, could the city try to facilitate some kind of transaction like that?
I think if property owners came forward and were interested in that sort of transaction, the city could have a say in that type of discussion. Yeah.
The other is the, I think that it's part of the housing element to rehab or update or facilitate updating maybe dilapidated properties for housing. And it may already be, there may be housing on it that maybe isn't up to code, that kind of thing. Is that addressed in the housing element as well?
That absolutely is. So there will be a program related to, or actually more largely a housing goal related to both the rehabilitation and preservation of existing housing, specifically lower income. So what we call at-risk units, or units that may convert from, may convert from low or very low income affordability levels to market rate. The city does a lot of work to talk to property owners to keep those at affordable rates. And there may be programs associated with it. And the city can actually get a portion of credit towards their RHNA for rehabilitating or preserving units that may have otherwise converted.
Wonderful.
Yeah, great. Well, I think I saw the order roughly come up. And I think Shami, you were up next, and then Mr. Hanson, and then Elizabeth and Laura. And Shami, you may be muted.
I am. Okay. Just a couple of things. One is, I know in the past, it seems like a very small number of units within a development have been allocated for affordable housing. And it just seems unrealistic that we'll have any chance of, qualifying a plan unless we have something more like 20 or 25% of units categorized as affordable instead of, say, 5%. And I was also wondering, I don't know the answer, if we get more credit if we allow, I know all of our units so far have been sort of at the moderate affordable level rather than low or extremely low. And I was wondering if we were considering having some units at their lower level, and if we did we get more credit? Those are my questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can't speak to past developments necessarily. Maybe staff can go ahead and take a
yes,
40,000 square foot, or 40,000 foot level.
40,000. Yeah, 40,000 feet above. I will give you a link to the latest annual progress report from 2020. I'll put it in the chat. And that says our production over the 5th cycle in each income category. So we did, the city was able to, through our existing inclusionary housing program, was able to produce units in each income category from extremely low through above moderate, obviously, the regular market rate units. So that we would see as a success of our program. Right now, our inclusionary program is at 10% minimum for projects over three units and above in size. Some areas require a higher percentage, just like some specific plans. For example, Holly Seacliff is a 15% inclusionary requirement. So that is the 40,000 foot overview of our existing program. you know, potentially that the increasing would be an option. At this point, I don't think it's been discussed in detail. The construction of the affordable units is definitely something more market determined. And you'll see that when I can link the progress report in the chat. For probably almost every city, there's always going to be much more above moderate new construction versus the extremely low or
Right.
Just
lower
that-
categories.
And
With
I
the
will,
cost, with the cost of land being what it is, it seems that in order to, you know, get a very large number of affordable housing units, we're going to have to maximize the density of those within any construction project. So, I mean, there's only so much land available. And so it just seems to me that this whole thing, in order to meet the, you know, get an acceptance, we're just really going to have to get more towards 20 or 25%. And I know developers won't like that, but it seems to me to have any hope of a plan. And, you know, from the community's point of view, to not have too many of these buildings, that would be the way we have to go. My opinion,
Right.
that's all.
Some
Thank you.
projects, I did want to just add, for some projects do elect to pay an in lieu fee instead. And we're able to leverage those monies to build more affordable units, like a more cohesive project type that might include some supportive services or those kind of things too, to have a more cohesive, affordable, fully affordable development. Just one point to add.
Do we get
Thank you.
credit for that toward the
Yeah.
units?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Hanson.
Nicole?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Charles, go ahead.
Charles. Yeah.
Hi, this is Charles, the housing manager for the city. One point I want to add to Nicole's comments is that, you know, going up to 20 to 25% sounds great as a way to narrow the gap in terms of affordable housing, but the financial feasibility of a project would take a big hit in terms in that there would be a huge gap to make the project feasible, which would then, you know, most cases developers would ask for a city subsidy of some sorts in the millions of dollars to fill that gap. So at the 10% level, you get a chance to make sure that the project is feasible and there may not be any city money that's put into the project, which the city is lacking in terms of like general fund revenue, and with the demise of redevelopment 8 years ago, the money's just not flowing in there for affordable housing like it used to.
Thanks, Charles. We do have a number of folks with their hands up, and we'll get to everybody who has their hand up. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we'll go to Mr. Hanson.
Yes, I do feel an obligation. I think most of the people here are aware that I am a member of the Huntington Beach Historic Resources Board, and I do feel an obligation to say that while I am open to the idea of redeveloping what were they called, open lots, as Mrs. Goodman referred to, the site on Warner Avenue in Nichols Lane is not an open lot. It's a home it's an old home that was owned by Charles Ferrata, who was a resident of historic Wintersburg, an old Japanese American town in Huntington Beach. And the Huntington Beach Historic Resources Board, on which I serve, and full disclosure, the Huntington Beach Historic Resources Board, on which I serve, wrote a letter back in 2018, full disclosure, when I was not on the board yet, expressing support for preserving that home. And it is also on the National Trust for Historic Preservation. It was listed as one of 11 most endangered historic places in both 2014 and 2015. So I really disagree with the assertion that it is a open lot. It is a lot that needs to be remained as is, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Appreciate that. I think next on the list I had Laura. You may
Laura,
you may
you're
be on
muted.
mute as well.
Sorry, okay.
Perfect,
Thanks.
I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I had trouble kind of wording this question, so it's
That's
about,
okay.
but it's in my notes here when you were talking about the zoning, and I believe you said that the existing zoning, there's part of the process is evaluating the existing zoning, and that I think you said that's already been done, and that it's clear that the existing zoning will not meet the requirements of
Correct.
housing element, right? So, okay, so my question is then you talked about the rezoning and overlays and what that was, and that as I understood it was that the owner of like a commercial property or whatever, then it could be, they would have the option to rezone, or I don't know. It's not clear to me if it's really rezoned or not, or they have the option to make it residential. But if they don't have to, then I don't understand how the whole, the weight that carries, that overlay, because it sounds like it could go either way. And I thought the whole idea was that the big overall idea was that the current housing, or the new one, has to be realistic, so to speak, to show that the rezoning could actually, be done. Even though the city doesn't do the building, it's supposed to be a realistic plan. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, I think you have a good understanding of it. So you got it. So essentially, one popular strategy, again, I mentioned rezones and I mentioned overlays. What you were kind of referring to was the potential for an overlay to add an existing entitlement. The state does consider that a realistic potential to redevelop because it gives the property owner the ability to do that. Then the other part of that analysis is to actually look at the characteristics of the parcel, look at the existing use. The city is not privy to a lot of private lease documents or anything like that regarding how long tenants have leases on sites or things like that. But there are certain characteristics that you can determine based on deferred maintenance, as somebody mentioned earlier, discussions with property owners in terms of their intentions for the property. These can kind of help set that realistic criteria that you mentioned. So that's a little bit more of the second part of the analysis. The first part really just from a legal zoning standpoint allows the ability for it to happen, which is obviously it is the first thing that needs to happen before we can even consider the site. And then we need to take a look and evaluate individual parcels. The city can't talk to every property owner, in the city with that within this time frame. But that's why we have the public review document available. We welcome people to make comments, especially if the properties are available. And the city does do their best to reach out to as many as they can. So we go through that process.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Laura.
Okay.
Thank you. But you do have a good understanding of the process, so thank you for you. Obviously, you watched the presentation before.
Well, I'm working on it.
I appreciate it. Elizabeth, I think you had your hand up next.
My question is, as the city takes a look at rezoning certain areas, I know there's a lot of concern about preserving single-family neighborhoods, and so that might put pressure to rezone existing multifamily from say, and this is something we saw in Garden Grove, to increase the density. If it's currently 30 units per acre, they might go up to 45, or if it's 45, they might go up to 60. And I'm just wondering, is that a strategy that is being considered? And if so, are there any preparations, or is displacement being considered? Because a lot of times, you'll have the naturally occurring affordable housing that potentially could be upzoned and perhaps used more efficiently, but there are families that live there. There's households that potentially could be displaced. And so I was just curious if that's a strategy the city's looking at, and what might be done in the case that there was displacement.
Yeah, no, thank you. You bring up a great point of low, what we call the two different types of affordability, we'll call it. One is deed restricted affordable, where they're required to be kept at certain rents. And the other is just, like as Elizabeth mentioned, more naturally occurring affordable units that are either older and folks have paid off those homes, so they no longer owe anything much more than the taxes on them. And that becomes an affordable housing option for them, pending that they don't resell them. Or there are just areas based on the characteristics of the housing that is there that are more affordable than others. Part of the fair housing analysis looks at what the state terms in many areas term lower resource areas, and those are just areas that have lower access to different resources. The demographics are such that the folks there tend to show in those census tracts tend to show lower incomes, or schools have lower test grades. All of those play factors into the fair housing analysis that's looked at. So as we go through, we take that into account. And we look through the different factors that contribute to that and where housing should go. And there is a point made to make sure that there's not an overconcentration or a redevelopment of areas that are already termed essentially low resource. So it doesn't mean it's always a perfect practice. It is the city's best intent to take a holistic view at the sites analysis process and look at all portions of the community. I will say one thing that is interesting when we look at the sites analysis process is we have to, as Laura mentioned, identify realistic parcels in terms of redevelopment. Oftentimes those do take the form of larger commercial sites simply because there are certain laws like AB 1397. I don't expect anybody to remember the numbers or anything like that of the assembly bills, but AB 1397 deals specifically with lot sizes in terms of identifying sites for the housing element process that are either larger than half an acre or smaller than 10 acres. Those are deemed somewhat more realistic parcels to redevelop. And when you have single family, there is certainly the option to rezone those areas, but what makes it difficult is that you have so many small lot parcels and so many different property owners that it's hard to get together a collection of parcels that are large enough to be able to get a development that is able to be built. Sometimes you can do a single family to a duplex or something like that. But short of somebody being able to get a lot of properties directly adjacent, does make it a little more difficult. Doesn't make it impossible, but we also look at accessory dwelling units as a way to add additional units into those areas that's a little bit more fitting for the character of those neighborhoods. So as we go through, the city does really take a large, holistic view of this process and try and figure out the best way to make sure this process goes smoothly. It is different in every community, and as someone mentioned earlier, it is not an easy process by any measure. So what's interesting is that we go through this process and we look for the best strategies, and a lot of those are pulled out of the community through workshops like this or through the survey responses that we got. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer. So Raymond, I think your hand was up as well. Raymond, there you go.
Okay, I want to challenge the original premise that we should build that many units in our community by an organization that doesn't understand our community. They do not represent our community. It's not a democratic process. I think we have a good argument to legally push back on that original number of 13,000 plus. This community, I've lived here for 56 years. This community is a coastal community. So we have the boundary of the coast. That's a boundary that's controlled by the Coastal Commission, and we can't do anything about that. But this area, geologically, as well as environmentally, is very sensitive because we have a very sensitive ecosystem here, which is going to be devastated by this kind of development. And our quality of life is going to be impacted. So also, geographically, there is a major fault, earthquake fault, that goes right through the center of our city. In fact, the main fault goes right by the city hall. and you can't build near that place. Also, we're in a floodplain that every 50 or 100 years will flood most of this city. In addition to that, we live in a tsunami zone, and you have to be able to evacuate the people that live near the coast. And by doing all this development is going to trap all these people that are trying to get out. In the case of a tsunami, we'll only have at most half an hour warning. And so all of these factors, I think, can be used to mitigate the 13,000 allocation by RENA, I think it's an unfair allocation. It's an unrealistic allocation, and it will destroy this city as we know it.
Thank you for those. Thank you for those comments, Raymond. I didn't mean to cut you off, but as far as the city goes for legal challenge, as far as I know, we're not pursuing that. It's a one size fits all approach, to be honest, from the state, and SCAG developed the methodology for determining the allocation of units for each city. We did go through the lengthy appeal process, and we did bring up several of the issues you mentioned, such as flood, tsunami, sea level rise, a lot of environmental factors. Ultimately, our appeal was not approved. Lots of other jurisdictions were in that same boat. I think only 2 were approved, 2 appeals were approved. But you might be interested to know, I think the Orange County Council of Governments has voted on some litigation potentially. So you may want to check out their organization. They have public meetings as well, I think. So you may want to get involved with them if you're interested.
And well, Raymond,
thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for that. I'm aware that other cities are fighting this, and I want Huntington Beach to fight for our city. That's all I'm asking. We haven't made an effort. I have talked with the city attorney. He thinks we have a good chance, and he would love to file a legal suit. And he's won for us before, and I think he can win again. So that's all I'm saying. We should put more effort on pushing back rather than just accept these numbers, which I think are ridiculous for our community.
Yeah, I think the last I heard at the council agendas was they voted to table the matter indefinitely regarding litigation. So we're moving forward with full housing element update analysis. But thank you for your comments.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Raymond, and fully understand. The city, one part of this we haven't talked about is the city is required to do an environmental analysis as part of the housing element as well. So the city will do a high level, what's called programmatic environmental analysis. And then every individual project, just like they do now, is required to go through environmental review and documentation as well. So this doesn't change the city's process in terms of going through environmental and taking a look at some of the factors that you've talked about. Simultaneously, the city also will, at some point, look at their safety element update as well. So when you get to the conversation of evacuation routes, that's a separate process that the city will look at as part of an update to their safety element. So a lot of things working in there, but a lot of things to consider as well. So thank you. Julian, I see you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, thanks. Just have a comment. So this is Julian with Equity Residential. We're an owner in Huntington Beach. We have the Regency Palms apartments and submitted a request for increased density on the site. And for us, I mean, these apartments were built in 1969. They're kind of functionally obsolescent at this point. And we think that the increased density will allow us to do things like add some more density while really respecting setbacks, and also add these affordable units at the extremely low or very low level, that would be great for the city. So just a comment that, you know, adding density to existing really low density and older multifamily stock can achieve a lot of the city's objectives as far as RENA is concerned.
I appreciate that, Julian. Thank you. So Shami, I see you still have your hand up. I don't know if that's up from your previous question or if you had another one that you wanted to ask as well. Sort of do last call. Again, I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
Were you talking to me?
I was, just because I think your hand is still up, but I think it may have just been up from
I
the last
didn't mean
time.
for it to be.
No worries.
But I do have a question.
Sure, of course.
In response to the fellow who wanted HB to sue the state or whatever, I did look, and it does seem to me that's more of an Orange County thing. I was looking into this, and it seems that Orange County has a density of over 4,000 residents per square mile. And, you know, relative to the other 5 counties in SCAG, you know, LA is 2,600, and San Bernardino and Riverside are under 1,000, and San Diego is under 2,000. So we already have a really high, you know, density in Orange County, and it seems ridiculous that we should have such a high number of these units assigned to Orange County. So it makes sense to me that Orange County should fight that.
Yeah, I understood. And as Nicole mentioned, I believe there's some discussion at the OCOG level of something to do in terms of a challenge to the state. So,
yeah.
Well, you know, as that process moves forward, you know, it is something that's you can be able to take a look at.
My other HB question is, I've heard a lot of discussion about doing infill in like single family residence with, you know, multifamily dwellings, fourplexes and whatnot. And it seems to me, looking at the demographics of Huntington Beach, the city keeps getting older and older, and has fewer and fewer children. So the families are going away. And we find these houses that are typically 1,500 square feet or more, 1,800, and they're just have 2 or 3 people living in them, in these 4-bedroom houses. So, you know, the characteristics of the city are changing, and I just don't know if the city doesn't need to look at that and become more of a beach city in the sense of having more smaller dwellings, you know.
Yeah, that's certainly something that the city takes a look at as part of that community profile. We look at trends in terms of the last 10 to 20 years of how demographics are going and how family sizes, age of population, all of that is taken into consideration, not only in the planning of housing units, but in the planning of programs as well, in terms of programs directed at some of those different groups. So
I mean, beach communities frequently have very small square footage dwellings.
Absolutely, yeah, and there are certain trends in different areas of small, either not necessarily tiny houses, but just smaller houses, as you're mentioning. So, given the size of those, you could potentially fit more of them on a lot, and it's something to look at for the zoning component of the housing element process.
I could see an overlay.
Yeah, potentially. We'll take a look. So I will go and I'll let Mr. Hanson end us off in terms of our comments. We did, I think this meeting was going till 7:30. So again, just being respectful of everyone's time. Mr. Hanson, would you like to bring us home?
Yes, I'd like to say that 2 things. One is that there is absolutely, in terms of the housing allocation numbers, whether we do accept them or sue about them, there is absolutely a disparity in the numbers for Orange County as a whole versus the numbers in, say, Riverside County or San Bernardino County, and even some of the upper counties like Ventura County or San Luis Obispo County. The numbers are not equally in terms of proportion, in terms of what is needed for the housing, in my opinion. The second is the idea that I think should be considered given the large amount of units we have, and I think frankly it is an amount that might not even be achievable with traditional high density apartments, and that is to have Golden West College, the community college in California, look at dormitories. This is not unprecedented. There are several community colleges in the north that have done this, as well as Orange Coast College down in Costa Mesa. So I think that's something we should look at as well.
I appreciate that. And I guess I'll finish my note on just saying what's interesting is the state actually has a census definition for a housing unit. And so depending on how that unit is developed, essentially, the city may or may not get credit for something that was, you know, a shared living, co-living sort of dormitory type situation. It all depends on how it's developed. You know, the city will get some credit, but may not get, you know, 4 units worth of credit for 4 individual rentable rooms. It all depends on how it's structured. So it is a great point. The city does look at student housing as part of the analysis that we do, but it's just a very kind of interesting subset of the analysis that looks at that type of housing.
No, I understand that. It just seems half credit is good given the numbers. Even if it's half credit, it would be good given the amount of numbers we have. So.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. Yeah, that's a great point. So with that, again, I want to thank everybody who stuck it out to the end. I know we've had a few folks drop off, but we appreciate you all taking the time to come out here. This presentation will be available on the city's website. You can come back, revisit it, revisit the conversation. All of the links can be found on the city's Housing Element Update website. And again, we'll continue to provide updates as we go throughout this process and ultimately available public review document. So with that, Nicole, I'll pass it back to you if there's anything else that you or any members from city staff would like to say.
Just want to say thank you again to everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules and making your way here to this meeting to give us your input. We really value everyone's comments. So again, just thank you, and make sure you sign up for the email subscription on the city's website for the Housing Element Update email blast. So you'll get notifications for when we have either more meetings or when the documents are available. Promise we don't spam you. It's only when there's something available or reminders for the meeting or that documents are available. So thank you again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.